So thank you very much for coming along to this session today, 12 top tips for home working. My name is Neil Wilkins and I'll be your host as we go through exploring quite a number of sort of ideas and thinking and hopefully some things that you can take away and practice at your leisure now that most of us are predominantly working from home in these very interesting and challenging times. Now, I'm not going to say that all of these things are things that you have to do from the word go. And I think for most people, particularly those of us who are sort of relatively new to the art of home working, will be probably taking these things one by one and beginning to explore some of the ideas in isolation, and then seeing which ones work and which ones don't. So it could well be that some of these things work really well for you and other things less so. I was running a previous session a little bit earlier today on this very subject for a client in the house. And one of the interesting things that I did at the end of the session was to run a short poll. And one of the top things, if not the very top thing, that the attendees on that particular session identified was that their biggest challenge they felt was the challenge of time management. So keeping focused, prioritizing, making sure that you get the best use and the best results from every day. And so I thought I'll focus a little bit more on that one today. Number 2 on the list was bandwidth issues and Wi-Fi. And I think as we move into this kind of much more acceptable way of working, the whole home working thing, I think certainly bandwidth challenges obviously come up from the networks and the platforms as they face issues trying to keep us all happy and keep us all served. But at the same time, I think there is probably a little bit of a relaxation on the expectation that we have, even if we're talking to customers and clients through video conferencing and the like. I think people are now much more accepting of the fact that, you know, calls are going to break up. We might need to lose the video bit and just go to audio. So I think people are relaxing into this being, you know, a really added value, if you like, to their home working experience without really expecting a huge amount from it. So let's have a little sort of start at the beginning of the day in terms of home working. I mean, certainly I'm drawing here, I would say, on probably the last sort of 20 years of having no fixed office. It's been something I've really, really enjoyed, and I've kind of found patterns of things that work for me. I'm not, as I say, suggesting that necessarily everything that we're talking about here is going to work for you, but it's worth having a little experimentation and trying. Now, for me, my home working regime or routine begins literally at the minute I wake up. So I tend to always put the alarm on. There is a tendency, and I guess a temptation, to say, well, you know, I'm only working from home, so I, you know, can I just have a little bit of a lie-in? I'll get up a little bit later. And in fact, actually, I'll start my work still dressed in, you know, pajamas. I won't get properly dressed. In fact, actually, I won't sort of, you know, shower and get ready for the day. I'll just kind of begin. I've found that to be really unproductive, because if you blur the start and the end of the day and just kind of find yourself drifting into the morning routine and sort of thinking, oh, I'm kind of working now, but I'm kind of not, I don't find that's a particularly effective way of beginning the day. And it kind of doesn't really create the right sort of mindset. So what I always recommend is having a very clear, defined starting point for home working. And that may or may not include, you know, breakfast. It may certainly include a very clear starting time. So if, you know, typically you were starting at 8:30, for example, then I would suggest you continue to start at 8:30. So don't let yourself kind of drift into that mindset of, oh, I can just have a bit of a lie-in because I'm only working from home. Try and maintain that discipline at the start of the day. And I think what you'll find is that, you know, that will ripple through for the rest of the day. One of the things that came up in the earlier session, which I ran, was around actually diet and actually working from home, and the temptation to maybe get a little bit lazy with kind of diet. And certainly one of the recommendations that came up from a number of the attendees at the previous session was that eating fresh food, particularly when you can, when you're home working, is a really great way to sort of keep those energies maintained as you go through the day. So try to avoid any sort of additional snacking that you wouldn't do necessarily in the office environment, and try and maintain that sort of typical morning routine as you go. I think the other thing to say really at this kind of point sort of early in the day would be to say that you've got to accept that this is very flexible working. I've seen quite a few sort of webinars and memes and stuff on social saying, oh, you know, it's very, very different to working from the office. And I would say, well, yes, it is. But actually, there are also a lot of similarities. So I would say just kind of calmly sort of ease yourself into this. There are things which I'm going to talk about in a minute, which are really important, I feel, to maintain and sustain, which are very similar to the office working. But then there's also things that you can do which are really beneficial, the things that will give you a real advantage working from home over and above the office environment. And of course, it's things like not necessarily having to sort of catch up on the office politics and gossip, because obviously there is this natural distance between you and the rest of the team. But what I would say is retaining, if you do have like an early morning sort of gathering or a team huddle, I'd say, you know, certainly maintaining and continuing to do that. There is this balance that you'll need to strike, and we'll explore this in a minute. This balance you need to strike between being available, being accessible and being social, as well as taking the opportunity to have those kind of quiet times because you can, because you're actually working remotely. So accepting this is a kind of flexible kind of working scenario is a really good sort of starting point that gets you kind of in the right sort of mindset and just really kind of staying calm through this. I think for some people, I've seen quite a bit of evidence over the last week to 10 days or so that as we all go through this, you know, significant change that we're in right now, a lot of people are kind of feeling a bit anxious about home working. And I would say that if you can kind of embrace this and just stay calm through this whole process, you know, there's a lot of advantages coming out the other side that will really kind of benefit you. Now, something I've been a big advocate of, and I would say is one of the really key things that you should do if you're looking to really effectively work from home, is to create workspaces. Now, a lot of people say create a workspace like a home office, and I say, well, okay, that's fine. Having a single defined place where you can be professional, where you can work quietly and get that kind of sort of, you know, sensible space that you need is a good thing. And if you do have the space at home to be able to do that, I'm saying that that's probably a good starting point. But one of the things I've also found very, very useful is to actually have workspaces. So maybe at some point in the day, you drift out and actually work from a slightly different space. Now, this could be your lounge, it could be your kitchen, it could be working maybe even from like a balcony or from your garden. So actually moving around and having different perspectives of your work home space is a really, really great way of both giving you a different and kind of sort of fresh reboot, if you like, as you go through the day, but also actually changing your sort of subconscious mindset. And what happens is, as you move through these workspaces, you find that you get this perception of stretching of time, which if you're trying to cram a lot of things in, because you might still be very, very busy working from home, you'll find that actually having different workspaces as you go through the day allows you to kind of perceive time in a much better way. So rather than kind of locking into one space where you'll find that probably, again, if you're doing a lot of computer work, time will start to shrink because it's just you and the screen. If you can actually find yourself in various different places, you'll find that time will spread, and you'll look back at the end of the day and think, my goodness, you know, when I was working in my home office at the start of the day, that feels a long time ago, because now I spend a bit of time in the kitchen, I did a couple of meetings and video calls from the garden or on the balcony. Now I've moved to the lounge, now I'm back in my home office. It feels like the day stretches. So for me, that's one of the key tips, I would say, sort of allowing yourself that kind of, you know, natural sort of flexibility as you go through the day. And the other thing I would say around this kind of topic is that never use your bedroom. If you can really avoid using it, you know, there might be a situation where you just have to do it because of family pressures or because you literally don't have the space. And of course, that's fine. But if you do have the opportunity to not have a workspace in your bedroom, that's a really positive thing, because it gives you this really clear sort of line, if you like, between leisure time and rest and relaxation and work time and being professional. And if you can keep some clear water between those two in physical space, that will be a really, really powerful and positive thing. I'd also say, in alignment with that, that the best effective home working is when you chunk your time. Now, what I mean by that is actually to divide and plan out your day into bite-sized chunks. Now, you might decide, because of your attention span, that you're going to work for chunks of half an hour. For me personally, I kind of typically work in chunks of 1 hour. So I might have an hour video call. I might then do 1 hour of planning. I might then do 1 hour of content production. I might then do 1 hour of supporting a client, and then I might repeat. What I find is when I chunk time, it means that I can have like a visible horizon for that next hour. So I can set myself a target of what I'm going to complete in that hour, knowing that that's my goal. So I don't have this whole day, this kind of almost thing that stretches out into the future, of which I'm going to complete a whole bunch of stuff and then typically find, well, actually, there's still quite a bit left on the list at the end of the day. What I tend to find is that if I chunk time and say, in the next hour, I'm going to achieve this action and this action, then I've got a really tight focus. And of course, if I share my core hours with the people I'm working with, so with clients and with sort of colleagues or maybe business partners, then they know when I'm going to be available for them. I can also, within this chunking time, start to decide the locations I'm going to use. So it might be that in my core hours at the start of the day, when I'm making contact with clients or maybe supporting somebody when I'm mentoring, I actually have time spent in the home office. And it could be then, as I come into the afternoon and I chunk time for delivery, it might be some planning stuff that I'm looking to do, or maybe some content writing. That's when I'd move location, potentially if the weather's nice, out to the garden, because that's appropriate for that kind of task. And of course, then it allows me to chunk time for the scheduled breaks as well, because taking breaks is really, really important. It's so, so easy when you chunk your time to think, okay, well, I'm just going to load lots of work stuff in here, forget the breaks, because I'm working from home, I can crack through all of this and get a lot done. And of course, that sounds like a really positive thing to do, but actually the most productive time is when you can intersperse it, even with short 5-minute breaks, where you move away from your work location, maybe just do some stretches, maybe go and make a cup of coffee, maybe go out for a short walk, whatever it is that gets you away from the physical place and from that mindset for just a short period of time in between each of these chunks of time will make you super productive. And this is all about setting boundaries. I often find as well that if you can create a no work lunch break, now that can be obviously based on how much stuff you've got on at the moment. It can be, you know, from 30 minutes to 60 minutes. And if you have the luxury of taking a longer lunch break, then great, that's amazing. But I find that actually taking a no work lunch break where you consciously are away from the work situation and that work mindset allows you to set a really nice, neat boundary that'll give you that kind of refresh and reboot as you go through the day. And of course, if you haven't got colleagues kind of driving that for you because they're not physically sat next to you, it's just a nice punctuation point in the day. So of course, you can figure out what time that's going to be for working best for you, but making sure you quite religiously stick to it is really, really important. And of course, if there are others working around your house as you're doing your home working, agreeing maybe sort of silent house times where, you know, if you can collectively agree that, you know, between say 2 and 3 o'clock, we're going to have a silent house. So we're not going to do calls. We're just going to have quiet time as a house. And of course, you can use that to benefit both you and the others around you. And again, sticking to these boundaries and agreeing them up front gives you that really nice sort of contract with others, but also contract with yourself. And it helps you to develop those kind of really good routines and habits that are going to serve you well. And of course, this comes really, really importantly when it comes to working with children. If you have children in the house, you want to be agreeing the roles that you have with the rest of the family. So if you have a partner or somebody else who's kind of co-looking after the children, agreeing the specific times and responsibilities. So kind of keeping them out of your work mix as you then offer the same up to them. So it strikes a really nice kind of natural balance. And then you can start to flow. So again, blocking out these schedules and these, you know, priorities and these sort of blocks of time. This is where chunking comes in really important. So it allows you to have those kind of goals at the start of the day of the things that you're going to achieve, which will be probably and very likely a balance between kind of work stuff and non-work stuff. And I think the more and more of us that are starting to do home working, it's starting to become a really kind of natural thing that if, for example, you do have children and cats and other interruptions coming through and you just happen to be on a video call and it just happens to be with your most important customer, it's kind of okay now. I think, maybe a year or so ago when it was all very professional and if you were working from home, you had to have the right environment and everything was silent and it was just like the office, but moved to your home. I think people now are much more sort of flexible and much more adapting and accepting that this is the real world now. So if there are interruptions, just relax into them. You can always just have a laugh. I've seen some really interesting sites on sort of one-to-one meetings over the last sort of week or so as people are, predominantly now working from home, and it's not something to be sort of shying away from. Just really agree the roles so that you can actually work sort of responsibly and carefully with each other. And this is about prioritising. And I would always say, the most effective home workers are the ones who prioritise their priorities. This means that what you need to be doing is setting those really clear goals. And I always think at the start of every day, if you can actually figure out what the key 3 things that you are going to be sorting, delivering, actioning, and sort of ending on the day in question, if you can agree those top 3 priorities, either strategic or tactical, it doesn't really matter, but you just agree those top 3 things. And as long as you become really obsessive about getting those 3 things done within the chunking of time through the various work locations that you have at home, then that's a really neat way of making sure that actually, you don't just achieve those tasks, but that you actually feel good and feel like you're being really productive at the same time. So for that, I would also say that if you find yourself drifting into quickly checking your social media, I'd say that maybe blocking off and actually scheduling specific social media time is a really healthy thing to do. And of course, any non-work tasks I would save for breaks. So things like home shopping, things like just reading the news and getting the virus updates and all those kinds of things that we're typically doing throughout the day now. I'd say try wherever you can to chunk those and schedule those into break time. It's fine to be doing them, this is real world, but I would say certainly focusing on your priorities and getting sort of priority chunks as you plan out the start of every day is a really, really sort of surefire way to become super effective. And as you do this and you start chunking your project work and delivery time, you always obviously want to be allowing some form of contact or socializing time. And so this is all about trying to strike a balance. So whilst working from home can be very, very productive because there are, well, you could argue fewer distractions. And for a lot of you, if you're working sort of literally at home alone, then obviously there will be a very small number of distractions. But it is really important to keep a natural and sort of a relevant and appropriate amount of contact with the outside world. And of course, that's peers, that's your line manager if you work for a company, that's clients and customers if you are customer facing. It's just really trying to sort of strike that natural balance between delivery and private time, quiet time if you like, and the socializing and contact time. And so what I suggest really is to really start to kind of almost sort of plan into your schedule and into the chunks, the video calls that you're going to have on any particular day. Now, when it comes to video calls, we've all seen really, really good examples and really poor examples where, the whole thing is just, toppled like a pack of cards. And most of the time it's because there isn't some form of agreed agenda on a video call. So what I always suggest is kind of set things up in advance. I mean, if you're using something like Skype, sort of Microsoft Teams or Zoom, for example, is to create just a nice little sort of environment for your video calls. And you can be doing this either from a desktop, from a laptop, or from your phone screen. And so some form of clutter-free background. So either with your background as a nice kind of sort of very, very subtle and sort of noise-free sort of visual, because people want to be seeing you and engaging with you rather than this just big sort of noisy sort of backdrop. And particularly if there are a lot of you on a team call, what you want is a nice, clear sort of talking head. And for that also, I'd always suggest good lighting as well. You often encounter people on video calls where they're literally sat with their back to a window, and of course then they just appear as a silhouette. That's not really adding value to the people you're on calls with, and it can be little things like that 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 can make or break the video experience. So just be a little bit mindful of how you're coming across to others. So sitting, maybe facing a window so that you're well lit, with a nice clear background is always a good starting point. So I'd suggest also agreeing an agenda, and really importantly, an end time for the call. Certainly calls where you have people on the call who are just so relieved that because they're working from home too, they've got this opportunity to just open up and chat. Obviously, by setting an agreed end time, it means that things don't just run on unnecessarily. So agreeing the agenda, agreeing an end time, and agreeing kind of the roles for inside the call is very much good practice that you would do a normal meeting if you were in the office. And also agreeing time for being social. This is different to the normal kind of office scenario. So what I always suggest is that, agreeing time for being social, probably at the start of the call, just kind of settles everybody in so that everyone can sort of feel comfortable, feel like they can open up, and then obviously contribute to that video call. And test different platforms. I mentioned just 3 there. Your organization may have a preferred platform that they recommend, and if so, that's the one you're going to work with. But if you have some sort of flexibility, just test out a few and see which ones kind of really work nicely for you. And of course, with great teamwork, it is about agreeing the ways of working. I mean, this is really extending the whole office environment into this virtual space. And it is about whether you're the team leader, the manager, or one of the team players. It is about actually trying to foster well-being for all of your colleagues, whether you're reporting up or reporting down and leading. It really doesn't matter. This is a virtual team working environment. So always be there to kind of support and listen to others. If you see people regularly kind of missing the team get-togethers that you have, then maybe it's time to schedule a one-to-one with them and just kind of check in with them and make sure that everything's okay. If you see certain people not contributing to the daily huddle, for example, maybe catch up with them after the call and just kind of check in and sort of foster well-being right across the team. And it doesn't matter what role you're playing, there's always something you can do to contribute to that. And I would also say balance the team stuff with the individual stuff, catching up on a one-to-one basis so you can kind of, check in on project progress so that you can kind of just make sure everybody's kind of feeling okay is a really important thing, as much as it is appealing to the greater sort of team environment. And as part of this, I always say you kind of know who your introverts are and who your extroverts are. The extroverts will be the ones who are clamoring after the virtual group hug, and the introverts will be the ones who spend minimal time on these calls and actually just want to get back to work because they're really embracing the isolation and solitude of home working. It doesn't mean that they don't want to talk to you. It just means they're really getting fuel and energy from that kind of quieter environment. So everybody comes at this from a slightly different perspective. So it's about being very sort of empathetic to everybody's different needs. And great remote teamwork really does listen as much as it does talk. So I'd certainly say that's an important thing to do if you're kind of working with colleagues. And the other thing you can do as well when you're working with colleagues is to share best practice. If you find some stuff that really works for you, do share your top tips with colleagues. I always think that's a really good thing because, you might be finding something that just really works on a day-to-day basis. And if you keep it quiet, you might be sort of limiting others who could really benefit from it. And as we do sharing, it's not just about sharing the top tips. I think we're seeing more and more demand, obviously, on the platforms, the technologies and the bandwidth. So another little recommendation, which is very timely right now, is if you don't need your Wi-Fi, you don't need that internet connection, is just log off. Just be good for the local community around you and don't kind of hog the bandwidth with, high definition or 4K sort of video sort of uploading and downloading if you don't really need to. This is all about collaboration and sharing. So one of the great ways of home working when there's a lot of you doing it in a particular area is just to make sure that you're doing it on a way that is sympathetic to others. Yes, there will be times when you need that big bandwidth because you have got this important call, but when you haven't, maybe just switch it off. And particularly if you're out and about and away from your desk and from your computer, is maybe just go on to a sort of plane, a sort of airplane mode, literally sort of on your connection, so that it frees it up for everybody else. And I think that's just a really nice way of sort of collaborating really with others. And at the end of the day, I'd say finish your working day with really a conscious decision to be finishing on time. And this, for lots of people, is a necessity to really kind of stay strong in this process, because a lot of people will find that they get almost kind of locked in. I used that phrase earlier, locked into that process of what they're doing. And it's very easy to see kind of time slipping away. So if you can decide, and again, as part of your chunking of time, as part of your moving around your workspace is, if you can figure out a time that's going to be most appropriate to finish, and then finish. Anything that was left outstanding, you can add to your tomorrow's action list. And I'd always suggest great time management is always partly to be delivering today, but it's also about putting some stuff in for tomorrow. So create tomorrow's action list today, because then you can just close the lid of your computer or just press close on your phone and actually take that last call and know it's the last call and the last thing you're going to do today, safe in the knowledge that you're going to pick it up again tomorrow. And I would suggest, if you have spent the whole day with screen and on screen, is that see if you can avoid screen time in the evening. A lot of us have kind of been multi-screening because it's kind of what we're used to doing in the evenings. But because home working tends to be very screen-based, because the interactions and because the delivery tends to be on screens both large and small, it's really important to see if you can do other things in the evening. So go for a walk, do some exercise, stay with the family, start to kind of do other things that are away from the screen wherever you can. Obviously it's not impossible to do that, but it's a really sort of tricky challenge, I think, for a lot of people. But where you can, you'll end up in a much better state, ready for tomorrow. So that would be my sort of top tip, if you like, for finishing your working day. So my top 12 tips really is about sort of starting out with a good morning routine, really starting with, your plans, accepting this is flexible working. So you do need to prioritize both the way that you're going to chunk time and also those really sort of creative and helpful, hopefully, workspaces that you have that give you that different perspective as you go through the day. Make sure you set the boundaries, and particularly if you have children and you have others around the house, make sure that everybody knows everybody else's time. And then you can really sort of respect their time as much as they'll respect yours, and take and share those responsibilities. Whilst you might be the main breadwinner in the house, it doesn't necessarily mean that you then have to take all of the accountability for the online home working. You can strike a nice balance, and that's a really healthy thing to do, particularly if you're working with your family very, very close by. Prioritize those priorities. If you can do those top 3 tasks every day and achieve them, then you're going to end every day working from home with a really positive feeling that it was productive and enjoyable as well. See if you can balance the contact and the distance and delivery side of things. So schedule in, as part of that chunking of time, schedule in those video calls, get those booked into your calendars straight away. And if you can do that in advance, you can then see the week ahead. So you've got this really nice kind of visible horizon over what you're going to do, when you're going to do it, who you're going to do it with, and you can then build in this remote team working. So you don't have to feel isolated and in solitude, but at the same time, you don't have to feel overwhelmed by the amount of additional screen contact you're going to get. And as you find these great ways of working, see if you can share that best practice, because others really will benefit from the way that you've achieved this really, really good way of working at home. And ultimately, at the end of the day, if you can finish positively and strongly at a defined time, then you can start to set up these really good habits. And then you'll be able to then build this routine, build this kind of flow, if you like, of energy as you go through the day. You're not going to peak too soon. You're not going to then be drifting and getting disconnected or getting sort of distracted by certain other things that you could be doing as you go through the day. You're going to know that you balanced it quite right for those around you and also for the team back at work. So I would say, for me, based on around sort of 20 years experience, those have been the top sort of 12 things that I've found have been really useful just to be able to do this and survive what is actually, for a lot of people, quite an unusual way of working. But it doesn't have to feel so disconnected that you don't feel part of the team. And it also doesn't have to feel isolating in any way, shape or form. And at the same time, it can actually be really refreshing and really nice, because it might open up just a more efficient way of working. You might be able to optimize your time. You might be able to do a little bit more exercise than you ever could when you were commuting or going into the office. So I wish you every success in the way that you've managed your time with your home working. If there are any sort of tips that you can share, and particularly if you're watching this on catch up, use the message thread facility below this particular video clip and share your top tips or ask any questions, and I'll endeavour to come back to you with hopefully an answer, maybe a little bit of guidance or maybe an idea. So thank you very much for coming along to this short webinar today on 12 top tips for home working. Hope you found it useful, and I look forward to sharing some more content and seeing you on a webinar again very, very soon.